An empty stone avenue stretches quietly toward the horizon, its paving stones worn smooth by centuries of forgotten footsteps long vanished into time. Fine desert dust settles slowly upon towering megalithic walls, where carved friezes and sacred inscriptions gradually surrender their sharp relief to wind and rain. Through hollow archways and crumbling doorways, empty domestic chambers stand open to the elements, illuminated only by shifting shafts of quiet afternoon sunlight. Massive tree roots snake across collapsed stone courtyards, twisting relentlessly through mortar joints and prying apart masonry once thought to be indestructible. Wild grasses push through the cracks of monumental staircases, reclaiming the grand terraces where kings and high priests once addressed cheering multitudes. In the central plazas, dry stone fountain basins hold only fallen leaves, and silent colonnades cast long, solitary shadows across deserted corridors. No deliberate sound breaks the profound stillness of the ruins, save for the gentle whisper of the wind passing through roofless stone halls. Looking upon these weathered stones today, it feels almost impossible to imagine that this place was once the vibrant heart of an empire. Yet once, long before the silence and the dust took over, living human beings inhabited every corner of this magnificent city. They gathered around warm domestic hearthfires in the early morning, filling these rooms with the comforting scent of baked bread and roasted grain. Mothers held their infants in these very chambers, singing ancient lullabies and nurturing the next generation beneath the protection of sturdy roof timbers. Craftsmen worked tirelessly in shaded workshops along these avenues, shaping delicate clay vessels, weaving patterned textiles, and hammering glowing bronze tools. Merchants debated prices in crowded marketplaces, exchanging foreign goods, precious gemstones, and harvested crops brought from distant river valleys and trade roads. Scribes recorded tax inventories and historical chronicles onto soft clay tablets and parchment scrolls, cataloguing the growing wealth of their flourishing state. Upon monumental temple altars, priests burned fragrant incense and chanted sacred liturgies, offering prayers to sky deities believed to ensure eternal prosperity. In the administrative halls, proud rulers issued royal decrees and commanded armies, convinced that their dynasty would govern for endless generations of humanity. Like us, the people of this lost city walked their streets with profound confidence, never doubting that their civilization had mastered time itself. They believed their walls were too thick to fall, their reservoirs too deep to dry, and their gods too powerful to abandon them. But today, the bustling commerce, the family laughter, the political ambitions, and the sacred chants have all completely dissolved into thin air. The names of their visionary architects have been erased by time, and their intricate written language survives only as an undeciphered enigma on stone. All that remains of their complex society is a field of silent, sun-bleached rock surrounded by the encroaching wilderness of nature. This striking absence confronts us with one of the most haunting and urgent mysteries in the entire story of the human species. How does an entire civilization, an organized, sophisticated, and technologically capable society simply cease to exist on the historical map? We are not speaking of a single tragic individual lost to the wilderness, nor the isolated fate of a small, wandering family line. We are talking about the complete vanishing of entire populations, tens of thousands, sometimes millions of people who shared a single collective culture. When modern humans imagine lost civilizations, we naturally envision dramatic cataclysms, sudden apocalyptic earthquakes, volcanic explosions, or devastating foreign invasions sweeping through overnight. But archaeology reveals that the unraveling of human societies is rarely caused by a single violent afternoon of destruction and fire. More often, civilizations decay quietly from within, suffocating beneath prolonged droughts, exhausted farmlands, broken supply chains, and rising internal social divisions. When resources fail and systems collapse, the grand monuments of stone and bronze quickly lose their ability to sustain human life. Which brings us to the most vital and thought-provoking question of all. Did these ancient peoples truly disappear from the earth? Did they perish beneath the rubble of their falling cities, or did they make the conscious, practical decision to simply walk away? Did ordinary families pack their modest belongings, leave the grand palaces behind, and disperse quietly into surrounding forests, hills, and river valleys? What appears to modern archaeologists as a sudden, mysterious disappearance was often a long, desperate, and necessary process of human migration and adaptation. The physical cities crumbled into ruin, but the descendants, the knowledge, and the cultural memory of their builders drifted into new landscapes. In this documentary journey, we will travel across continents and millennia to uncover the truth behind the ancient world's most famous vanished societies. From the planned brick metropolises of the Indus Valley to the Aegean palaces of Crete, and from the Maya jungle pyramids to the North American mounds. We will examine the physical evidence, analyze the latest environmental science, and trace the quiet steps of those who left everything behind. Our journey begins by stepping inside the eerie stillness of an abandoned metropolis, examining the intricate process of what happens when a city goes silent. A great ancient city does not die in a single afternoon of catastrophic fire, nor does it vanish like a ghost into morning mist. The true death of an imperial metropolis is a quiet, prolonged, and almost imperceptible process that unfolds across multiple generations of human life. It begins not with the thunder of foreign armies, but with the slow, creeping silence of civic neglect across stone avenues and aqueducts. One quiet spring morning, the great stone canals are no longer cleared of mountain silt, and fresh-water pools uselessly in the lowest residential alleyways. Along the outer perimeter, stone retaining walls begin to bow under the weight of unmanaged earth, while public water fountains slowly choke on moss. In the central marketplaces, fewer trade caravans arrive from distant frontiers, bringing smaller sacks of grain, fewer dyed textiles, and increasingly troubling rumors. Exchange rates falter, civic granaries run dangerously thin, and the towering defensive walls suddenly feel far too vast for the shrinking population living inside. Neighborhood by neighborhood, the noise of daily life begins to retreat, leaving long stretches of colonnaded avenues eerily hollow in the twilight hours. Then the first families make the agonizing but practical calculation to abandon the monumental home their ancestors had built centuries before their time. There is no frantic panic or screaming in the streets. They pack only what can be tied to working beasts or carried on foot. They carry small clay jars of drought-resistant seed grain, heirloom bronze chisels, and warm wool blankets, leaving heavy stone-grinding basins behind forever. In the quiet domestic courtyards, they sweep the hearthstones clean one last time and pull the heavy wooden doors shut behind them. At dawn, small, quiet caravans pass beneath towering stone gatehouses, turning their backs upon an empire that can no longer feed its own people. With every departing family, the vital pulse of the metropolis weakens, and warm domestic hearthfires go dark one by one across districts. Soon comes the very first winter, without human voices, domestic cooking smoke, or the steady, protective warmth of hearth fires inside stone rooms. In the cold, damp night air, cedar ceiling beams groan and contract, allowing the first drops of winter rain to seep into ancient mortar. Without the daily rhythm of brooms sweeping stone flags, a delicate veil of airborne dust settles across every polished courtyard, corridor, and altar. First, a single millimeter of fine atmospheric silt, then centimeters of dry desert dirt blown by relentless winds across empty, deserted stone thresholds. Autumn gusts blow dead leaves into roofless royal palaces, piling dry brush against the carved stone pedestals of deities who receive no evening offerings. Desert foxes dig their quiet dens beneath the collapsed lintels of administrative archives, while wild owls roost peacefully within empty high temple rafters. Lizards sun themselves upon royal thrones, and field mice nest inside the hollow resonance of bronze ceremonial bells left hanging in silence. Stray grass seeds carried upon mountain winds lodge themselves deep within the hairline fractures of the stone pavement, waiting for brief seasonal rains. Come spring, microscopic root systems drink the trapped moisture, expanding with patient, immense hydraulic force to split apart colossal, perfectly fitted limestone blocks. Year after year, creeping ivy and tangled vines drape themselves across grand facade friezes, softening sharp architectural geometries into rolling green mounds. What required kings, master architects, and armies of stonecutters centuries to construct, patient nature reclaims in absolute, undisturbed, and permanent stillness. When modern archaeologists excavate these lost mounds millennia later, they rarely discover burned ash layers, dropped bronze weapons, or unburied fallen soldiers. Instead, they uncover the haunting forensic signature of an orderly retreat, intact ceramic cooking pots, carefully swept floors, and doors secured from outside. The absence of violent catastrophe tells us that civilization is never truly made of stone, baked brick, or towering defensive walls alone. It is a fragile, living contract between seasonal rainfall, agricultural abundance, shared economic trust, and collective human belief in a common future. When that invisible contract shatters, monumental palaces remain standing, but the living soul of the culture quietly packs its belongings and departs. The stone shell remains behind as an enduring fossil, slowly sinking beneath layers of wind-blown dust, waiting for future eyes to decipher its silence. What immense environmental shifts and social fractures were powerful enough to empty the most sophisticated, prosperous metropolises of the ancient world? To discover the truth, we must travel 4,000 years back in time to the vast alluvial floodplains of the ancient Indus River Valley. There, an astonishing Bronze Age civilization built standardized brick grid streets, covered subterranean drainage, and multi-story mansions, yet vanished without a single war. Our forensic investigation into vanished worlds begins here, among the silent, wind-blown brick avenues of Harappa and the monumental Great Bath of Mohenjo-daro. More than 4,000 years ago, along the fertile floodplains of the Indus River, human engineering achieved an unprecedented level of geometric perfection. Spanning across modern Pakistan and northwestern India, this vast civilization covered an area greater than contemporary Old Kingdom Egypt and Mesopotamia combined. At its cultural zenith, over 5 million people lived within hundreds of planned settlements, anchored by the monumental urban centers of Harappa and Mohenjo-daro. When Victorian railway engineers first stumbled upon these ancient mounds in the 19th century, they mistook the billions of fired bricks for ordinary quarry stone. But modern archaeological excavations revealed something that shattered every established assumption about how early human civilizations were organized and governed. Unlike the chaotic winding alleyways of early Bronze Age Mesopotamia, Harappa and Mohenjo-daro were laid out on precise, cardinal-oriented grid plans. Broad arterial boulevards stretched up to 30 feet wide, dividing the city into orderly residential blocks built from standardized kiln-fired red clay bricks. Every single brick across thousands of square miles adhered strictly to an exact mathematical proportion of 1 to 2 to 4 in dimensional ratio. Behind these sturdy brick facades, ordinary citizen homes featured private central courtyards, second-story living quarters, and dedicated indoor bathing rooms. Wastewater from domestic bathing platforms flowed down terracotta pipes into covered brick drains running beneath the stone sidewalks of every street. Inspection manholes allowed municipal workers to clear blockages, creating the world's very first comprehensive public sanitation system long before the rise of Rome. At the heart of Mohenjo-daro's high western citadel stood the Great Bath, an immense rectangular basin lined with bitumen waterproofing and finely cut brickwork. Citizens descended into its quiet waters along broad brick steps, participating in communal purification rituals that celebrated the sacred, life-giving power of water. Yet, amidst this extraordinary engineering marvel, archaeologists immediately noticed a chilling absence that distinguishes the Indus people from every other ancient empire. There are no monumental royal palaces towering over the populace, no grand triumphal arches, and no giant stone statues depicting dynastic warlords or conquerors. Extensive digs have yielded virtually no dedicated military weaponry, no heavy iron armor, no siege engines, and no depictions of warfare or enslaved captives. Instead, excavators discovered finely carved steatite seals bearing intricate animal engravings, unicorns, humped bulls, and elephants, accompanied by an enigmatic, undeciphered script. For over 700 peaceful years, this merchant civilization flourished through international trade, shipping carnelian beads, copper, and lapis lazuli to Mesopotamian ports. They lived with unprecedented public order, universal sanitation, and shared prosperity, appearing completely immune to the destructive ambitions of despotic kings. And then, around 1900 years before the Common Era, the golden pulse of the Indus Valley began to slow and quietly fade. For decades, early 20th century historians believed a violent foreign invasion had swept down from the north, slaughtering the peaceful inhabitants in their streets. But rigorous modern forensic osteology has thoroughly dismantled the invasion myth. The few scattered skeletons found in Mohenjo-daro bore no marks of sword violence. The true culprit behind the unraveling of the Indus civilization was far more silent, invisible, and impossible for any human engineering to defeat. Deep climate cores taken from the Arabian Sea reveal that around 4,000 years ago, the regional summer monsoon rains began to steadily weaken. As atmospheric weather patterns shifted, the great glacial rivers fed by the Himalayas altered their courses, while the vital Gagahakra River slowly dried into dust. Year after year, winter crops withered in the parched fields, and the complex canal networks could no longer capture enough seasonal floodwater to sustain agriculture. In the brick streets of Harappa, the municipal administration began to break down as civic resources became scarce and populations grew increasingly desperate. New houses were constructed hastily from recycled broken bricks, encroaching directly onto the once immaculate public drainage channels and narrowing the grand avenues. Standardized weights and measures disappeared, trade with the Persian Gulf ceased, and the famous steatite writing seals were no longer carved or used. There was no cataclysmic siege, no apocalyptic firestorm, and no mass burial pit dug to swallow the dead of a fallen capital city. Instead, over the span of 2 centuries, families made the only rational choice left. They abandoned their drying brick metropolises to search for water. They migrated eastward toward the wetter, fertile plains of the Ganges basin and southward along the verdant coastal estuaries of Gujarat. As they settled into smaller rural villages, their monumental urban infrastructure dissolved, but their farming knowledge, spiritual customs, and bloodlines survived. The sophisticated brick palaces and covered drains were left alone under the baking sun, slowly buried beneath 4 millennia of river silt and dust. When we look upon Mohenjo-daro today, we do not gaze upon a tragedy of human violence, but upon a quiet masterclass in climate adaptation. The Indus civilization did not vanish from the face of the earth. It simply decentralized when its natural lifelines could no longer support urban grandeur. But while the Indus people quietly walked away into river valleys, other Bronze Age civilizations met far more dramatic, terrifying fates across the sea. Far to the west, in the azure waters of the Mediterranean, another brilliant seafaring culture built magnificent labyrinth palaces without defensive walls. On the sun-drenched island of Crete, the Minoans created the golden age of the Aegean before a catastrophic disaster shook the ancient world. Our forensic search now crosses the Mediterranean waves to uncover the lost labyrinth of Knossos and the cataclysm of the island of Thera. High above the sunlit azure waters of the southern Aegean, on the rugged island of Crete, an extraordinary maritime empire once ruled the waves. For nearly 1,000 continuous years, the Bronze Age Minoans built an island civilization of unmatched artistic elegance, engineering luxury, and economic prosperity. At the grand palace complex of Knossos, multi-tiered limestone terraces and painted cedar colonnades rose in a labyrinthine layout around a vast stone courtyard. Master artisans decorated royal palace corridors with vibrant plaster frescoes, depicting graceful athletes vaulting over charging bulls, playful dolphins, and sacred snake priestesses. Ingenious architectural lightwells funneled soft daylight into subterranean living chambers, while sophisticated stone drains and clay pipes provided running water and domestic sanitation. Deep within the cool palace storehouses, rows of giant ceramic jars called pithoi stood filled with golden olive oil, dark wine, and grain. Yet, amidst this breathtaking wealth and architectural majesty, modern excavators uncovered an astonishing paradox that baffled historians and archaeologists for over a century. Unlike every other contemporary Bronze Age fortress in the ancient Mediterranean, the sprawling coastal palaces of Crete possessed no defensive stone walls whatsoever. The Minoans erected no massive bastions, engineered no fortified battlements, and stationed no garrisons of armored soldiers along their sun-drenched coastal harbors. Their absolute safety lay upon the open sea, secured by an invincible merchant navy that dominated every maritime trade corridor across the Mediterranean. Swift, multi-oared galleys exported fragrant oils, fine textiles, and exquisite polychrome pottery to the ports of Old Kingdom Egypt, Canaan, and Cyprus. They lived in profound harmony with the ocean, genuinely believing that their naval dominance and wooden hulls made them invulnerable to foreign human invasion. But 70 miles to the north, beneath the quiet waters of the volcanic island of Thera, an ancient geological monster was slowly awakening. Sometime during the late Bronze Age, around 1600 years before our Common Era, the island of Thera ruptured with unimaginable world-shattering violence. The catastrophic detonation was among the most violent volcanic events in human history, releasing explosive kinetic energy equal to hundreds of atomic detonations. The entire central caldera collapsed into the boiling sea, instantly displacing billions of tons of ocean water and generating immense seismic shockwaves. Massive tsunamis reaching up to 40 feet high surged southward across the open Aegean Sea at the speed of a modern commercial airliner. Within an hour, titanic walls of churning water pulverized Crete's northern ports, obliterating harbor facilities and smashing the proud Minoan fleet against jagged cliffs. Immense, billowing plumes of toxic volcanic ash, vaporized pumice and sulfur, darkened the Mediterranean sky, blotting out the sun and creating eternal twilight. Smothering layers of acidic tephra blanketed the fertile inland valleys, poisoning freshwater springs, suffocating blooming olive orchards, and starving thousands of farm animals. Violent ground tremors accompanied the blast, toppling painted timber-supported columns across Knossos and overturning domestic oil lamps to ignite uncontrollable palace fires. Yet modern forensic archaeology reveals that this spectacular volcanic disaster did not wipe out the entire Minoan population in a single terrifying afternoon. The true death of Minoan civilization was the slow, agonizing economic unraveling that followed the sudden loss of their maritime trade lifeline. Without their merchant ships, international commerce dissolved overnight, and the royal redistributive system in Knossos could no longer supply basic food rations to citizens. Deprived of grain, security, and spiritual faith in their traditional priest-kings, widespread food riots and civil unrest shattered the once peaceful island culture. For several generations, scattered island survivors attempted to clear the ash-choked fields and rebuild modest settlements amidst the blackened ruins of their palaces. The intricate administrative networks, the linear A writing system, and the sophisticated courtly culture slowly eroded into fractured memories of a lost golden era. Then, observing that the legendary sea empire lay broken and undefended, a new and aggressive warrior culture sailed south from the Greek mainland. The Mycenaeans, warlords clad in heavy bronze plate armor and driven by relentless conquest, landed upon Crete and took possession of the silent halls of Knossos. Minoan art, religious iconography, and trade knowledge were forcibly integrated into the bureaucratic and martial system of the newly arriving Greek mainland dynasties. The peaceful, labyrinthine paradise of the Aegean vanished forever, surviving in memory only as the dark, mythological tale of King Minos and the Minotaur. The grand, painted walls sank into the dust, remaining hidden until Victorian pickaxes uncovered the bull frescoes nearly 3.5 millennia later. But the armed conquerors who seized the palace of Knossos would soon find themselves trapped within the same fragile web of late Bronze Age civilization. Within 2 short centuries, the fortified Cyclopean citadels of the Mycenaeans themselves would be engulfed by fire during a mysterious cascading global catastrophe. Our historical investigation now crosses the sea to the rugged hills of mainland Greece, where the great bronze fortresses collapsed into the ancient Dark Age. High above the rocky plains of the Peloponnese, towering stone citadels once cast long, intimidating shadows across Bronze Age mainland Greece. Built by legendary warrior kings, the Mycenaeans constructed fortress cities with defensive limestone blocks so colossal that later Greeks believed Cyclopes lifted them. At the great citadel of Mycenae, visitors entered through the monumental Lion Gate, walking past royal shaft graves filled with beaten gold. Golden death masks covered the faces of fallen warlords, surrounded by bronze swords with gold-inlaid hilts and intricate silver drinking cups. Unlike the peaceful maritime frescoes of Crete, Mycenaean art celebrated the harsh reality of war: charging chariots, bronze-tipped spears, and captive warriors. Inside the central throne room, called the Megaron, a colossal circular hearth blazed beneath towering columns and brightly painted mythological plaster walls. From these fortress halls, royal scribes recorded every single economic transaction onto wet clay tablets using an early Greek script called Linear B. They meticulously counted individual sheep, jars of scented olive oil, bronze tripod cauldrons, and even the exact number of working chariot wheels. Every aspect of life was tightly controlled by a supreme monarch, the Wonax, who managed an intricate, highly centralized palace redistributive economy. Raw copper from Cyprus and tin from distant western mines flowed into royal workshops where palace bronze smiths forged deadly armor and tools. For 3 centuries, this formidable military and economic machine dominated the Aegean world, seemingly invincible behind 30-foot thick stone fortress walls. Yet around 1200 years before our common era, a profound sense of anxiety began to ripple through the fortified Mycenaean kingdoms. In the citadel of Mycenae, engineers desperately carved secret subterranean staircases deep into bedrock to secure hidden water cisterns during potential sieges. At the coastal palace of Pylos, scribes hurriedly etched frantic administrative tablets recording coastal defense assignments and watchers guarding the open sea. The tablets speak of melted bronze temple dedications, hastily converted into arrowheads, signaling an approaching catastrophe that no royal army could prevent. And then, within a single chaotic generation, the great palace fortresses of the Aegean were systematically engulfed in massive, terrifying waves of fire. Mycenae, Tiryns, Pylos, and Thebes burned, their grand, timber-reinforced limestone walls toppling inward onto shattered clay archives and blackened palace storehouses. For decades, historians debated what monstrous force could destroy such heavily fortified stone citadels in such a rapid, coordinated span of time. Was it the enigmatic sea peoples raiding from across the Mediterranean, devastating coastal cities and shattering long-distance Bronze Age trade networks? Was it a devastating multi-decade mega-drought that triggered regional crop failures, starvation, and desperate rebellions against the ruling warrior aristocracy? Or was it a systemic domino collapse where the failure of international trade caused the hyper-centralized palace economic machine to implode from within? Modern archaeological evidence suggests that no single catastrophe destroyed Mycenae, but rather a cascading convergence of climate, warfare, and economic failure. When the royal palaces burned, the entire administrative architecture of Mycenaean civilization disintegrated, leaving behind a fragmented and depopulated landscape. The complex Linear B writing system vanished completely from memory, as ordinary farmers had never been taught the scribal art of literacy. For 400 long years, the Greek world plunged into a deep, silent, dark age of localized survival and forgotten imperial grandeur. The magnificent gold treasures, cyclopean masonry, and bronze-clad heroes survived only as spoken campfire songs, eventually preserved in Homer's monumental epic poetry. What was once the pinnacle of Bronze Age military power became silent, grass-covered mounds surrounded by the whispering winds of the Peloponnese. Across the ancient Old World, this pattern repeated itself. great stone monuments collapsed when climate stress severed their fragile economic lifeblood. But across the vast Atlantic Ocean in the dense tropical rainforests of Central America, another civilization engineered monumental stone pyramids in isolation. Deep beneath the impenetrable canopy of the Petén jungle, the classical Maya built towering city-states governed by divine astronomer kings. Our search now travels to the tangled rainforests of the Maya lowlands, where colossal jungle metropolises fell into sudden, enigmatic silence. Deep beneath the dense emerald canopy of the Central American rainforest, towering limestone pyramids pierce the jungle mist in profound, ancient silence. For over 6 centuries during the Classic period, the Maya civilization built one of the most sophisticated, densely populated empires in human history. In monumental jungle metropolises like Tikal, Calakmul, Palenque, and Copan, populations numbered in the tens of thousands beneath soaring stone temple pyramids. Master astronomers tracked the movements of Venus, the Sun, and distant constellations with astonishing mathematical precision, developing the intricate long-count calendar. Hieroglyphic scribes carved dynastic histories, royal coronations, and cosmic mythologies onto towering stone stelae erected across paved ceremonial plazas and ball courts. Divine kings known as Kuhul Ajau governed these powerful city-states, acting as sacred intermediaries between ordinary farmers and the gods of rain. Yet the rainforest of the southern Maya lowlands presented a terrifying environmental paradox that modern urban planners would consider entirely uninhabitable. There were virtually no permanent flowing rivers or natural freshwater lakes across vast swathes of the porous limestone terrain of the Petén. To sustain millions of citizens, Maya hydraulic engineers transformed the jungle into a vast, interconnected machine of terraced hillsides and raised wetland fields. They paved massive public plazas with waterproof stucco plaster, channeling millions of gallons of seasonal monsoon rainwater into colossal, stone-lined urban reservoirs. These artificial reservoirs and filtration systems kept cities alive through long, dry seasons, proving human ingenuity could conquer even the most unforgiving landscape. Every aspect of Maya society, its agriculture, its imperial politics, and its divine royal authority, depended entirely upon the regularity of the annual rains. And then, during the 9th century of our Common Era, the vital tropical rains began to fail across the entire Central American lowlands. Deep sediment cores extracted from the Cariaco Basin and regional cave stalagmites reveal a catastrophic series of multi-decade mega-droughts striking the Maya world. As rainfall dropped drastically, the colossal reservoirs dried into cracked mud, and the intensive agricultural terraces could no longer yield sufficient maize harvests. To make matters worse, centuries of intensive deforestation to produce limestone plaster had stripped surrounding hillsides, severely accelerating regional soil erosion and drought. When the rains refused to fall, the divine legitimacy of the holy kings crumbled, shattering the spiritual contract between ruler and desperate population. Instead of uniting against environmental catastrophe, rival city-states escalated endemic warfare, competing violently for the few remaining water sources and fertile lands. Archaeologists excavating late classic sites have uncovered desperate defensive palisades hastily thrown together across ceremonial plazas using carved stone monuments and temple stones. Across the 9th and 10th centuries, the grand cultural heartbeat of the southern lowlands began to stutter, falter, and systematically go silent. One by one, the royal courts ceased carving their dynastic, long-count dates on stone monuments. leaving unfinished stelae abandoned in quarry pits. At Tikal, the last royal inscription was carved in 869, after which the great royal palaces were permanently deserted. There was no single apocalyptic meteor strike, and no mysterious extraterrestrial intervention swept the Maya people from the face of the earth. What occurred was a rational, desperate, and decentralized exodus of ordinary farming families choosing physical survival over loyalty to a collapsing urban order. Families gathered their heirloom obsidian blades, packed woven baskets of dried maize, and walked away from the starving, war-torn cities of the interior. They migrated northward toward the coastal cenotes of the Yucatan Peninsula and dispersed into the verdant highland valleys of modern Guatemala and Mexico. In the north, new urban centers like Chichen Itza and Mayapan rose, continuing Maya astronomical traditions, art, and commerce for centuries to come. Left behind in the abandoned southern lowlands, the great limestone pyramids were swiftly enveloped by strangler figs, creeping roots, and impenetrable tropical vines. Within a few generations, the magnificent avenues, ball courts, and roof combs disappeared completely beneath the rolling canopy of the untamed Central American jungle. Yet the Maya people never truly vanished. Millions of direct descendants still speak their ancestral languages and preserve their sacred traditions today. Their story is not one of total extinction, but of human resilience when an unsustainable urban civilization collided with a changing global climate. While the Maya engineered towering limestone temples in tropical jungles, monumental builders far to the north were shaping the landscape in a different medium. Along the fertile banks of the Mississippi River, an astonishing Native American metropolis erected colossal earthen pyramids larger than the Great Pyramid of Giza. This was Cahokia, a sprawling prehistoric city that vanished long before European explorers ever set foot upon the soil of North America. Our journey continues north to uncover the lost mounds of the Mississippi and the mysterious unraveling of America's forgotten ancient city. Long before European sailing ships ever touched the Atlantic coast, a colossal prehistoric metropolis rose beside the fertile banks of the Mississippi River. Known to modern archaeology as Cahokia, this bustling city was once the largest and most populous urban center in prehistoric North America. At its cultural zenith around the 11th century, over 20,000 people inhabited its districts, making it larger than contemporary medieval London. Across 6 square miles of alluvial floodplain, indigenous engineers shaped the landscape by constructing over 120 massive earthen mounds. Dominating the central ceremonial plaza stood Monk's Mound, a colossal 4-tiered earthen pyramid rising 100 feet above the flat prairie horizon. This monumental structure contains 22 million cubic feet of earth, hand-carried in woven baskets by thousands of dedicated workers over several generations. Atop this titanic earthen mountain, supreme religious leaders and paramount chiefs resided in cedar-timbered palaces, conducting sacred rituals honoring the radiant sun. Below the mounds stretched the grand central plaza, a leveled 50-acre field where thousands gathered to witness religious pageants and high-stakes chunky games. Nearby, an immense circle of massive red cedar posts known as Woodhenge functioned as a precise solar calendar, tracking equinoxes and solstices. Cahokia stood at the center of an expansive continental trade network, importing copper from Lake Superior, marine shells from the Gulf, and Appalachian mica. For 2 centuries, this indigenous civilization flourished with astonishing agricultural abundance, harvesting vast fields of newly domesticated flint maize along rich floodplains. Yet, beneath this golden veneer of agricultural wealth and architectural scale, the ecological foundations of the city were being stretched to their absolute limits. To construct hundreds of mounds, thousands of thatched houses and defensive stockades, Cahokians clear-cut tens of thousands of mature trees from surrounding forests. Massive deforestation on the surrounding bluffs destabilized the topsoil, causing catastrophic erosion that choked local creeks and ruined delicate agricultural bottomlands with silt. Environmental core samples taken from Horseshoe Lake reveal that the Mississippi River experienced devastating, unprecedented regional floods during the late 12th century. The floodwaters inundated low-lying residential quarters, drowned thousands of acres of ripening corn, and contaminated the city's vital freshwater drinking pools. As the climate cooled with the onset of the Little Ice Age, shorter growing seasons and prolonged summer droughts severely reduced agricultural yields. Food shortages sparked rising social anxiety, internal friction, and mistrust between the ruling elites atop Monk's Mound and the struggling common farming populace. Archaeologists have uncovered physical evidence of rising fear. A massive 2-mile-long wooden defensive palisade equipped with bastions, rebuilt 4 separate times. The enormous labor required to fell 20,000 trees for each palisade placed an unbearable burden upon an already exhausted and hungry population. Sometime during the 13th century, the people of Cahokia made the quiet, collective decision that their great sacred city was no longer viable. There was no final apocalyptic battle, no scorched earth massacre, and no catastrophic epidemic wiping out the entire population within their homes. District by district, families dismantled their thatched dwellings, packed their stone hoes and heirloom pottery, and dispersed quietly across the Midwest. They joined neighboring tribes along the Missouri, Mississippi, and Ohio River valleys, carrying their agricultural knowledge, artistic traditions, and spiritual beliefs with them. By 1400, the great wooden palisades rotted away, and the 50-acre Grand Plaza fell into complete, undisturbed, and permanent silence. When modern settlers encountered the giant mounds centuries later, they refused to believe indigenous North Americans possessed the engineering capability to build them. But Cahokia stands as undeniable proof of North America's monumental urban heritage, an extraordinary empire that rose, transformed the earth, and peacefully decentralized. The story of Cahokia shows how even the richest river valleys cannot sustain monumental density when environmental balance and climate stability fail. Yet while Cahokia unraveled along the fertile waterways of the East, another civilization was defying nature in the arid deserts of the Southwest. High within the sandstone canyon walls of Colorado and New Mexico, the ancestral Puebloans engineered breathtaking multi-story stone cliff dwellings. Our investigation travels west into the arid canyon lands, where thriving desert metropolises vanished into the sheer red stone cliffs. Across the sun-scorched canyons and towering sandstone plateaus of the American Southwest, silent stone cities cling defyingly to sheer vertical cliffs. Known today as the ancestral Puebloans, this resilient civilization mastered one of the most arid, unforgiving desert environments on planet Earth. In the sweeping desert valley of Chaco Canyon, indigenous master masons engineered colossal, multi-story great houses aligned precisely with lunar and solar cycles. At Pueblo Bonito, a monumental semicircular complex of over 600 masonry rooms rose 4 stories high beneath towering sandstone canyon walls. Perfectly smoothed sandstone blocks were fitted with mud mortar, while hundreds of thousands of colossal timber beams were imported from distant mountain ranges. A sprawling network of engineered roads stretched straight across the desert floor, connecting distant outlying settlements to the sacred ceremonial heart of Chaco. Beneath the central plazas lay sunken, circular ceremonial chambers called kivas, where sacred hearths burned and clan leaders conducted secret spiritual rituals. For over 3 centuries, these desert communities thrived by capturing sparse flash flood waters in delicate sandstone check dams and terraced irrigation plots. They traded brilliant turquoise ornaments, painted black-on-white pottery vessels, and exotic scarlet macaw feathers imported across vast distances from tropical Mesoamerica. Yet, around the mid-12th century, the monumental stone great houses of Chaco Canyon were gradually decommissioned, systematically sealed, and quietly abandoned. The population shifted northward into the defensive sandstone alcoves of Mesa Verde, constructing breathtaking multi-story villages tucked beneath colossal, overhanging rock shelters. At Cliff Palace, stone towers, living rooms, and subterranean kivas were built directly into the sheer rock face, accessible only by retractable ladders. Building inside these high cliff overhangs provided natural shelter from freezing winter snows, summer heat, and rising regional social tensions and conflicts. But no architectural ingenuity or fortified cliff alcove could protect the ancestral Puebloans from the catastrophic environmental crisis gathering on the horizon. Modern dendrochronology, the forensic science of tree ring analysis, reveals that in 1276, a brutal, multi-decade mega-drought struck the entire southwest. For 23 consecutive years, winter snowpacks failed in the high mountains, and scorching summer heat dried the seasonal canyon streams to dust. Maize crops withered in the cracked soil year after year, depleted wild game disappeared from the mesas, and essential domestic water cisterns emptied. In the crowded cliff dwellings, food scarcity exacerbated malnutrition and disease, while mounting social desperation frayed the communal bonds of the clans. Facing slow starvation in their canyon homes, the ancestral Puebloans made the definitive decision to abandon their stone fortresses forever before 1300. They did not leave in chaotic terror. They carefully placed flat stone slabs over subterranean kiva entrances and sealed domestic doorway openings. Leaving heavy metate grinding stones behind, families packed their essential seed corn, pottery jars, and woven yucca sandals and walked southward. They migrated toward the permanent water sources of the Rio Grande Basin and the fertile desert mesas of Arizona and New Mexico. There, they founded thriving new pueblos, integrating their ancestral spiritual traditions, language, and architectural masonry into modern Hopi, Zuni, and Pueblo cultures. The cliff palaces of Mesa Verde and Chaco were never truly lost. They were simply left behind when the rains shifted permanently away. The empty stone towers stood undisturbed for centuries, preserved perfectly by the dry desert air beneath the quiet shelter of the sandstone cliffs. Looking across the ruins of Chaco, Cahokia, Tikal, Mycenae, Knossos, and Mohenjo-daro, a striking, undeniable universal pattern emerges across human history. Despite vastly different geographies, technologies, and pantheons of gods, every single one of these great civilizations faced remarkably similar structural breaking points. Why do the greatest monuments of human ingenuity inevitably succumb to decay, environmental shifts, economic exhaustion, and sudden collective abandonment? What are the common threads that bind the collapse of bronze palaces in Greece to earthen mounds in America and brick grids in India? Our forensic investigation now steps back to analyze the universal engine of civilization collapse: climate, resource depletion, warfare, and economic unraveling. We enter the synthesis of deep time to ask the ultimate question: why did all these extraordinary worlds vanish into the historical dust? When we look across the vast panorama of human history, the collapse of civilizations appears like a series of disconnected, tragic accidents. We imagine ancient cities flourishing in eternal isolation, only to be struck down by unexpected catastrophes, wrathful gods, or terrifying foreign conquerors. Yet modern, interdisciplinary science, combining geology, climatology, archaeology, and systems theory, reveals a profoundly different, deeply interconnected pattern of systemic, societal unraveling. Civilizations do not collapse because a single stone falls. They collapse because their foundational support systems become too rigid to adapt. The primary and most pervasive catalyst behind the abandonment of ancient urban centers has always been the shifting rhythm of water. When monsoon patterns altered over the Indus, when mega-droughts struck the Maya lowlands, and when southwest rainfall ceased, agriculture fundamentally failed. A metropolis of 50,000 people cannot survive on stone monuments and gold. It requires millions of gallons of fresh water daily. When seasonal rains fail for consecutive decades, even the most sophisticated reservoirs, terraces, and canal networks become dry, useless stone basins. But climate shifts rarely act in isolation. They are almost always amplified by human society's relentless ecological exhaustion of surrounding landscapes. To construct monumental palaces, burn limestone plaster, and fuel bronze kilns, ancient builders clear-cut vast old-growth forests across entire river basins. In Cahokia and the Maya heartland, deforestation destabilized river systems, turned fertile floodplains into muddy swamps, and severely accelerated soil erosion. By demanding ever-increasing crop yields from fragile soils, ancient societies pushed their ecological carrying capacity far beyond the point of recovery. This environmental vulnerability was further compounded by the hyper-specialized and brittle economic networks that enabled great civilizations to flourish initially. The Bronze Age palaces of the Aegean thrived on long-distance maritime trade, importing copper, tin, and grain across thousands of miles. When a single hub in this globalized web burned or severed ties, the entire late Bronze Age economic system imploded together. Complex, centralized bureaucracies and royal redistribution networks, once the source of civic order, quickly became paralyzing bottlenecks during times of scarcity. When resources dwindle, the social contract binding ordinary citizens to their ruling elites, divine kings and priest classes, inevitably shatters from within. If the divine king can no longer summon the rains and the palace granaries stand empty, the sacred authority of the throne evaporates. Endemic civil warfare, desperate peasant uprisings, and violent territorial conflicts erupted, functioning as the final symptoms of an already dying order. Invading armies and nomadic raiders did not typically destroy healthy empires. They simply marched through stone gates weakened by internal decay. Thus, the physical collapse of an ancient metropolis was never a single event, but a cascading failure across multiple interconnected domains. Climate stress triggered agricultural deficits, which bred economic stagnation, which incited political instability, which ultimately forced mass human migration and decentralization. Every great civilization built monuments believing they had mastered nature, yet nature proved that human engineering is always subject to geography. The illusion of permanence led rulers to double down on existing systems rather than adapting flexibly to changing ecological realities around them. And here lies the most crucial forensic realization of all. Abandonment was not a failure of intelligence, but an act of survival. When stone cities could no longer sustain human life, Ancient families made the logical, courageous decision to walk away from their monuments. They dismantled their households, preserved their vital agricultural knowledge, and dispersed into smaller, resilient communities better suited to a changing world. The physical architecture died, but the living memory, the languages, and the genetic heritage of the builders flowed into new landscapes. What modern historians long categorized as dark ages were often periods of profound human regeneration, ecological healing, and decentralized cultural rebirth. The earth slowly reclaimed the scarred hillsides, forests grew back over abandoned fields, and rivers washed away centuries of human waste. This profound distinction between the death of a political state and the survival of a people brings us to our final paradox. When we say an ancient civilization vanished from the earth, what does that word really mean to our modern historical understanding? Did these remarkable cultures truly disappear into nothingness, or are they still breathing quietly around us in ways we rarely recognize? In our concluding chapter, we examine the true meaning of disappearance and discover the enduring legacy of the ancient vanished worlds. The stone monuments of antiquity were never meant to stand forever as eternal, immovable guardians against the inevitable flow of natural time. They were simply temporary human shelters built with immense ambition, where our ancestors gathered to celebrate life, trade goods, and worship gods. When the winds shifted and the seasonal waters dried, our ancestors did not vanish into thin air like forgotten ghosts of legend. They simply stepped through the open gates of their monumental stone palaces and carried the flame of human culture into new landscapes. The grid streets of the Indus Valley dissolved into the dust, yet their geometric sanitary principles shaped countless generations of future urban planners. The painted palaces of Knossos collapsed into the sea, yet the maritime spirit and mythic storytelling of Crete laid the foundations of Greece. The cyclopean citadels of Mycenae burned beneath the stars, yet their legendary warrior songs echoed across millennia through the epic poetry of Homer. Deep within the dense Central American jungle, Maya astronomical wisdom, sacred agricultural cycles, and ancestral dialects still endure among millions of living descendants. Along the Mississippi, the towering earthen mounds of Cahokia fell silent, yet the deep, spiritual reverence for the river continues across native nations. High within the dry, sandstone cliffs of Mesa Verde, the kivas sleep peacefully beneath rock shelters preserved as sacred shrines by modern Puebloans. No human culture that ever carved a stone, cultivated an ear of corn, or named a distant star is ever truly lost. Their bloodlines flow silently through our veins today. Their mathematical discoveries structure our modern world, and their ancient dreams still shape our imagination. When we walk among these quiet world ruins, we are not looking at the tragic defeat of humanity, but at its incredible resilience. We see societies that possess the profound wisdom to abandon unsustainable stone empires in order to ensure that human life itself would endure. They remind us that our modern glass towers, paved asphalt highways, and digital networks are equally bound to the delicate laws of nature. Like the ancient builders before us, our ultimate survival will not be measured by the height of our monuments, but by our adaptability. We are not separate from the ancient past. We are simply the latest custodians of a continuous, unbroken human journey across deep time. Tonight, as twilight settles over the silent brick avenues of Harappa and the lonely limestone temple pyramids of the Peten jungle canopy, as cool desert winds whisper softly through the empty sandstone towers of Cliff Palace and across the grassy crest of Monk's Mound, As Mediterranean waves lap gently against the sun-bleached foundations of Knossos and the quiet cyclopean stones of the Peloponnese mountain fortresses, the ancient world rests in absolute undisturbed peace, cradled safely beneath the eternal, revolving tapestry of the quiet celestial night sky. The grand stone arches have surrendered their weight to the earth, and the ancient dust has settled into timeless, beautiful stillness forever. Every forgotten hearth has grown cool, every distant ocean harbor has stilled, and every ancient path is blanketed in gentle, starlit shadows. Close your eyes and listen to the gentle, rhythmic whisper of deep time echoing across thousands of years of silent human history. Allow your thoughts to drift like fine desert sand across the quiet, starlit ruins of empires that have long returned to nature. The journey across forgotten worlds is complete, leaving only the tranquil, protective embrace of the night to watch over your peaceful rest. Rest now in the quiet calm of the earth as the timeless echoes of history lull you into deep, restorative, and unbroken sleep.